Township guy, formerly South Chicago guy, will be at Lambeau Sunday. It's always who you know. Would love to meet Gerby if he's going to be there. Well, that might be difficult to arrange, but maybe word can filter to.
I'm sure he'll be there.
The Garbschmidt family. Yeah, it's a matter of the meet up, the meet and greet might be a little bit difficult. Baked Ruffles chips, Vikings running game slips. For Brosmer, Guardsy's heart skips. Wolves and 5. Another pretty good one. Outstanding one. Bears win, please. So next Friday, Picks with Gerby is must-listen radio. I retweeted back-to-back. Just goes to show you that, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself.
And if you can't be with the one you love, honey.
That's the other part, too.
Love the one you're with.
This is from R.H. Knight. This Carl bit has gotten old. Move on next year, please. Or move on next year, please. John Millay. There's no better radio segment anywhere than Barrero and Guardsy with the real Carl G. Changed my mind. I retweeted them both.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't get, that's the yin and the yang of it right there, right? Is it not?
It is.
So, I wonder if Carl will respond. Oh, that's what I forgot to ask Carl. I retweeted. I love these old still shots that we get of any sport back in, ancient history, ancient days. So a website called, or Twitter handle called Chicago History has a photo. It's a terrific photo. Really good quality. Bears Packers at Wrigley Field in 1934.
Nice.
The apartment buildings in the background on Sheffield. It's a good shot of basically you're looking out towards what would be right field. And what's interesting is I think in those days the photographers were allowed to be almost right on the play because the photographer, it's a close-up shot at a line of scrimmage right before a play, ball was snapped, and the quarterback is approaching the center, it looks like. And I asked, was great-grandpa Carl Gerbschmidt at this game? I meant to ask him while he was on because I think the Gerbschmidt family goes way back when it comes to Packer.
I think that's how they have
hysteria.
Tickets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's been in the family for a long time, so maybe I'll ask him next time. The turf, the grass does not look particularly good. And then there's a bunch of players out in the bleachers way out there. And then there's a sign. I wonder what that. I'm trying to get a close-up of the sign over the referee's head, but I can't make it out. So if anybody else can make that one out, I just retweeted it earlier today.
I didn't realize until the Gophers played at Wrigley how long the Bears actually played at Wrigley.
Yeah.
It was like 50 years, right?
I mentioned, I think it was the day, might have been that Friday that you were gone, because my memory does fail me sometimes. You go, once upon a time the Bears played at Wrigley Field, never saw him there, and then I had to stop myself. I did see him there. In it would have been 65 or 66.
Yeah, 1921 to 1970.
And what was unfortunate was, I don't know how my dad got the seats, but they were literally card table chairs on the field. It would be near, I would say it would have been just to the right of what would be the third base dugout.
Cool.
But a terrible spot because at least then the surface almost curved downward. So you almost felt like you were in a hole and you had 2 or 3 rows in front of you. So I don't know that we saw a play, but we were there. We were at Wrigley Field. So for whatever that's worth. Real quick, a lot of reaction. I after admonishing Russo Radio for getting in way too many X battles, I found myself going right down the rabbit hole last night for an extended period of time. Thought I had regrouped in the morning and then made the mistake of looking again, although I didn't respond any longer. And I do want to read one tweet, and it had a lot to do with, we had Andy Luger in studio for an hour, and the prevailing wisdom, as I attempt to capture it from people who were unhappy, and those people might have been those potentially on the right-hand side of the aisle, was that they wanted red meat from Andy. And they wanted him to just pound away at the fraud, leaving out the fact that he has done so previously, or we have talked about it with him a multitude of times. But because yesterday was the day he was on, and because the Feeding Our Future and other scandals are getting national attention via the New York Times story, it's we want our red meat and we want it now. I have guests on. Each of them, I may ask them questions. I may prod them. I did prod him, attempted to, on the nonsense uttered by the governor of the state of Minnesota during his Meet the Press interview. But ultimately, he gets to decide how far he goes and what he wants to say. And somehow that got extrapolated into, well, you guys are afraid of it. You guys are glossing over the story. The reason we had him on then, and many other times before, was to hammer away at the story. The number of people, I've said this before, the one thing that does slay me is inventing lies about what we discuss. It's fair game to disagree, 100%. But when you pretend, because it suits your needs better, that we have glossed over the subject of these scandals, that's where you lose me. But if you live in that world, A, you might not really listen that much. B, you're in a feeding frenzy yesterday, so you just want to go for it. And so the thing that you want to be angry. So the thing that will make you most angry is, well, they're glossing over it. They're letting everybody off the hook. And they're not making as big a deal of this as they would if it was a Republican administration. Those are lies. I don't know how to prove it to you other than go back. If you want to take the time, podcast day after day after day. But there was one post in particular that got my attention. This is from a guy named Phil. Dan had a very well-reasoned interview with the only person in Minnesota who did anything regarding the Somali fraud. That's his term. You forget that the state government not only brought no charges, but told the DHS to ignore their findings and keep funding the fraud. Luger filed the charges. It's the great box to this whole story. Luger is not, in many ways, he's more interested in substance over the style of rhetoric. I've got to, not only am I going to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, I'm going to pontificate on it over and over again. He doesn't like to do his work that way. I respect that. That's up to him. But to forget that the only reason you have this red meat, incredibly inviting red meat, is that Andy Luger went to the Fed, went to his bosses and said, we got something major going on in Minnesota. I'm ready to tackle it. But I need a bunch more people. I need to expand my office dramatically. And they signed off on it. The only reason any of this got done was his tenaciousness. So to make him the object of your ire is just ludicrous in that you don't have the story if he doesn't pursue it as emphatically and tenaciously as he did. So I thought that tweet kind of handled it very, very well. Rhetoric is, and I think what people also have to understand, each one of us makes a decision on how far is enough or angry enough. But I can tell you, I know myself pretty well, and my level of vitriol and anger related to this story and my viciousness on air for many years, certainly the last 12 to 18 months as the thing has intensified, is up there with any of them. It may hurt the feelings of those, well, he's a lefty. You can call me whatever you like. I don't care anymore. Whatever label fits you or how you want to describe me, fine. Free country. Call me a hardcore lefty. But two things can be true. If you think I'm a hardcore lefty, you can't accuse me of going easy on this. And the idea that we mean harder on it with the Republicans, I can't get any harder than yelling into the microphone, mocking and ridiculing over and over again the lack of accountability, the fact that nobody has really paid any kind of a price, and the ham-handed way the governor has swung and missed repeatedly on this story, as recently as the Meet the Press interview, which I discussed yesterday on the show as well. In fact, we're going to come back with a little bit of sound from our guy, Lou Ragoose. You're familiar with Lou Ragoose?
Love Lou Ragoose.
Intrepid reporter, KARE 11, guest on this program many times.
Lou Ragoose.
There's a video that he has sent out that also plays into much of this conversation. I'll just say, though, if you want more from Andy Luger, I think you're wasting your time. I think you're forgetting. He's the one guy you go, well, I may want him to speak more viscerally on the subject, but you can't get any more visceral than making the cases as effectively as he did, and then his successor has followed that up very nicely as well, to creating the attention rightly deserved about how poorly this state has functioned for a number of reasons. He doesn't walk away from the race issue. He's fearless on that issue, which is exactly what you should be looking for. He's even fearless on the issue of whether there's something in the culture in the country, in Somalia, that is also in some cases being driven back here, that enters into the number of individuals who have been convicted, who have that background. So I don't know. I know what you're looking for. I know what you're looking for, but you need to, I think, devote more of attention and your anger someplace else, as far as I'm concerned, than the guy who set the whole damn thing in motion almost from the beginning. We'll come back with the Ragoose sound and then prepare for, I should say, Ben Goessling. He's going to join us at 4:30. I have gotten some questions about, okay, how do you think the local media has done handling this story? I think it's mixed, to be honest with you. I think some have handled it pretty well. I believe that there is a lot more meat on this bone from a reporting standpoint, if there is a stomach for it and an interest in pursuing it. I don't think there's any, and a lot of it is separating rhetoric, like we mentioned the workers at the one department that said basic, but we don't really know who was speaking, that made a number of very serious allegations. We talked about that with Andy, and I agree with what he said, which is it's a lot of disturbing stuff there, but where is that? That would have to be vetted. Who's speaking? Have they come forward? He basically said our office was looking for, people coming forward forever. So I think there is much more to get to. And I think one of the reporters who does try to hold proper feet to the fire and follow the story, no matter which direction it might go, is Lou Ragoose, who we've had on many times over the years from KARE 11. And
including on this story.
Including on this story from
these
time to time.
trials.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
So there's some visual aspects to what he says here, but you can follow it, just most of it, via the audio. This is something I think that Lou sent out via X earlier today, raising questions on a number of things that politicians have said regarding who was taking care of the fraud, who stepped in, and who didn't.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and his political allies continue to incorrectly claim that the state was responsible for stopping the massive Feeding Our Future fraud, despite the evidence that's come out in each trial and the legislative audit that was done proving that false. This week at an event, Walz claimed the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which the governor oversees, investigated the case, then handed it over to the federal authorities who charged it. The truth is, the BCA was not involved at all. It was the FBI. Then on CNN, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter said this.
And by the way, those fraud allegations were uncovered by local law enforcement, and our state attorney general pressed charges. Our state law enforcement presence is what caught that, is what held those folks accountable.
Again, it's not true that local law enforcement uncovered the fraud. And who prosecuted it? It was the U.S. Attorney's Office, not the state attorney general. Look at the timeline here from the legislative audit. In February 2021, the FBI actually first contacted the Minnesota Department of Education about fraud allegations that they had heard about. Then in April 2021, MDE provided info to the FBI about the fraud. Remember how there was also a lawsuit after the Education Department did try to stop paying the fraudsters? Well, in that case, the Attorney General's office and MDE did not even tell the judge that fraud was the reason they wanted to stop paying. Look at this damning deposition of MDE Assistant Commissioner Darren Cordy during that civil case. Feeding Our Future's lawyer asks, did you ever address with the commissioner the possibility of there being any fraud in the meal programs? Cordy answers, no, not in those terms. Then, does MDE, to your knowledge, have any reason to suspect there's been intentional acts of fraud with respect to the meal programs? And Cordy answers, no. At this point, I've reported over 100 stories on the Feeding Our Future case. I know an untrue statement about this case when I see one. If this talking point from the governor continues, you can consider this the fact check. I'm Lou Ragoose. Follow for more news.
That's Lou Ragoose, if you didn't tell.
Oh,
and very effective.
big time, Lou.
And again, a lot of this, there is still, you can even, in the comments that he was kind of riffing on and responding to and rejecting, that's part of the problem. Pretending that various individuals on the local level or the state level stepped up when they didn't. And the Democrats who are in positions of authority, they need to come to grips with that and have some willingness to acknowledge it and offer greater accountability. There's absolutely no question about it. I've even heard, the Star Tribune, we get into this little game of, well, the Republicans are using this as a political wedge. I'd be fine with that as an observation if I'd ever heard it regarding Democrats using a particular story as a political wedge. There are times when the story itself should be about more than the politics, even though politicians are going to try to take advantage of it, because that's what they do. And believe me, they do it on the left side of the aisle and the right side of the aisle. But the questions that are being raised here, the examples, the contradictions offered up again in the Ragoose report and many others, says that you don't have to be on one side you don't have to be a shark or a jet to say, what the hell's going on here? And where is the willingness to look in the mirror a little bit and not pretend that individual agencies got involved and made a difference when they didn't? That's part of the problem. And the other thing, which we talked about in depth with Andy the last two times he's been on, minimum, is that and he said this flat out, we have to get over the notion that an allegation of racism is racism, or automatically means that racism applies in a particular case. Within the Democratic Party, there needs to be a come to Jesus meeting that if you curl up in the fetal position as soon as someone yells race because of your concern in that area, you're doing everybody a disservice, quite frankly, including those who are really facing, racism, a racist situation. You end up cheapening the real stories and the real examples. The idea that and it was proven in court several times, that was part of the leverage that many of these criminals took to get the state to go belly up. We're going to go after you publicly, and we're going to brand you all a bunch of racists. That can't work anymore. And that's a problem, I think, within the party that immediately says, oh, my God, racism charges. We got to be sensitive about that. We have to realize who's involved in this situation. The sensitivity should be following the facts and following the story, not being bowed immediately by that allegation. And over, there are indications that that's what drove the state's, I guess you could say, decision-making in this case, or unwillingness to follow this particular story. That's a problem that should be examined and discussed, not put, behind closed doors, but confront it and be honest about it. And there's not anywhere near enough honesty about it, and there's not enough discussion about it either. Bottom of the hour break, we'll get to your guy, Ben Goessling, who's in, who's out for the Vikings, and we'll ask for his interpretation of what the head coach had to say about J.J. McCarthy. All that's coming up next. All right, maybe Ben Goessling can be the ultimate arbiter of what sadly has become sport in this town this week.
The whisperer?
The team is 4-8. That means the playoffs are not even a whisper. So we got to fill in the time. So now it's a game of interpreting every single sentence, every word, every inflection offered by the head coach on the quarterback, 9, J.J. McCarthy. Ben Goessling joins us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline, thanks to our good friends at Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. So here's what's fascinating to me about the interpretation of KOC's dreams. Well, actually, it's not dreams. Actually, what he said this week. I took it, Guardsy took it as, well, really, yeah, that's what I think many of us, not second guessing, but first guessing, said all along that it might be a better approach with J.J. McCarthy, and is him maybe kind of acknowledging that he put too much on the plate. However, a dissenting opinion that I heard earlier today is from Matthew Collar. He interpreted the comments this week from the head coach as, okay, go do it, man. I've done my due diligence. I'm the quarterback whisperer. I've done everything I can do for you. At some point, you're going to sink or swim. You're just going to have to go play. Almost more of I'm distancing myself from you because I've done everything it's on my plate. That's my obligation. So go play some football. So where are you on interpreting all this stuff?
I think the idea that Kevin O'Connell, who talks as much as he does about organizations failing quarterbacks, would be distancing himself or washing his hands of J.J. McCarthy after 6 starts is a little hard to believe. I have a hard time thinking he would say that publicly. I think a lot of this has been realizing, kind of like you said, that he's probably put a little too much on his plate in terms of changing mechanics during the season. They are asking him, I was just having a good conversation about this in the locker room today with a couple of people, in terms of how much different he's being asked to play at the NFL level. And this is just a matter of trying to decipher defenses that are doing way more complex things than you are in college. It is a lot to learn on the fly. And we can have the conversation about should they have gone into this season assuming or hoping that they could go as far with him as they did, given how much of a learning curve there was going to be to this. But I think it's more of a realization that, okay, we've tried it, and it's just going to take a little longer to try to make it all work. So I think some of this is him looking at what can I do to help this player given the current state of things, more so than it's, okay, I got to just go out and have you fend for yourself.
You know this well. We talked about it at the top of the show. The added pressure for McCarthy, I think right now, despite the fact that the team pressure is pretty much gone in terms of the postseason, is that I believe the next 3 opponents all 3 of them rank in the bottom 5 defensively in points allowed. So to me, that is going to be the test for JJ, right? Because I think we're all looking for some signs of progress, and if he comes close to continuing to struggle at the level he has tended to struggle, I got to believe there's even going to be more alarm bells going off, given, at least on paper, the defenses he is about to face.
No doubt. I would make the case that these 5 games, the playoffs are probably not going to happen. It would take them winning out and getting a lot of help. It's not something I would expect to happen. But I think these next 5 are as important for the organization as a whole as anything we would see in a playoff-type season. And here's why I say that. They need to have something to hang their hat on from this season with regard to J.J. McCarthy. I remember my first year on the beat, Christian Ponder was in his second year as a starter, and I know everybody probably just had a little bit of a reaction when I said that name. But the last game of that season, which was his second full year in the league, he goes out and plays well enough, makes some big throws, didn't end up, throwing for 365 yards like Aaron Rodgers did, but he makes the complimentary throws to help them win the game, beat the Packers in conjunction with Adrian Peterson going for 199 yards, and they go to the playoffs. And obviously he didn't play in that playoff game, but they spent that entire offseason talking about, well, if he could bottle what he did in that Packers game and we see more of that, we feel like we have something to go on here. And I think it's a bigger deal with McCarthy because I think the hopes are higher for him. I think there is more of a ceiling that they see in terms of what he can be, but you need something to say in March and April, hey, look back to what he did on December 7th against the Commanders or December 14th against the Cowboys. We can see where the progress is, and we need to have something to go on. I think it's really important for them to see that. And the other thing to mention here is that after Sunday, they're back on national TV. The Sunday after that, they are in the backyard of the owners of the team, the team that they grew up rooting for. And then after that, they're on Netflix on Christmas Day. So this is going to play out in big audiences or in a couple of cases, national TV audiences, and then in the other one, in a venue that is particularly important to the ownership of the team. So I think all of this is extremely important for the vision of this and what it means and how much change they are kind of expected to make personnel-wise or possibly staffing-wise at the end of the year.
Ben Goessling, as always, brought to you by, as I said, Standard Heating and Air Conditioning. In terms of how all this might translate regarding game plan approach, what have you picked up this week? What do you sense in that regard?
Well, I mean, when he's talked about simplifying things, I asked Wes Phillips a little bit more this week about what that means. And it's probably a little less volume in the playbook. It's maybe a little more consistency in formations, because I think one of the things they've run into is you have so many different pieces on the offensive line that has not been together very much. And you have people playing different spots, and there's just a lot more room for mistakes when you have different formations all of the time, and there's details that get lost and maybe blocks and angles and leverage that you're not hitting quite the right way. So some of this has been minutia in terms of the formations, the spacing, all of that stuff. You're going to probably see some of those things transfer over a little bit more, and that's, a pretty granular level. But in terms of the play calling, I think it's going to be, probably some more concepts to get him moving quickly, get the ball out of his hands. I wouldn't be shocked if they see a little more play action. You can kind of go back to some of the bootleg stuff where it's a half-field read. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some things that have kind of been, key concepts for him. I think some of the times where he's getting the ball over the middle of the field, you've seen him make those throws probably a little bit better than when he's trying to push it to the sideline. So it's probably a matter of trying to hit on concepts that he's been familiar with and he's been comfortable with. And, the touch throws have been a struggle. There's no doubt about that. So maybe they're not leaning on those quite as heavily. And then you have to get to the point where he understands how to work in the pocket. And I think if that line gets healthier, that's probably an easier way to do that, because some of the plays where he's gotten hurt have been whether he's either on the run or trying to extend the play. And I think there's a little bit of a discussion, too, of, hey, when you're going to do that, you've got to slide, you got to protect yourself. But if you can play within the pocket, you have to be able to do that, too.
Carl in Cottage Grove asks, what if KOC wanted Drake May from the start, which I think we kind of know, and had to settle for 9 and is now beyond the point of exasperation and is symbolically telling Kwesi, I told you he isn't the guy. Now, I would be shocked if the Vikings selected J.J. McCarthy despite the protestations of KOC, right? I mean, we all know he may not run the organization, but he's got a lot of authority. And when it comes to the quarterback position, I find it very hard to believe that Kwesi is going to do anything that the head coach doesn't want to go along with.
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance that is what happened. I mean, Kevin O'Connell was driving the bus on that quarterback search, and it was very clear they were going to take the player that Kevin O'Connell thought would be a good fit for this offense. Now, Drake May was certainly the guy at the top of their list, and he's the guy that I think they would have wanted. I mean, they had their eye on him back into 2023. They knew how good he could be, and they were very excited about the possibility of, if they don't take a quarterback in 23, they might be able to come back and get him the next year. The problem was when they won 7 games, it put them farther back in the quarterback order, I guess, than they would have wanted to be, and it just was going to be very difficult to get up there. I think, if you want to Monday morning quarterback this, pardon the pun, it would be, should they have spent even more than they were offering to go up and get Drake May? I mean, it would have been an extremely high price to do it, and I don't know if the Patriots would have done it even then. It looks like the Patriots made the right decision to stick and pick because Drake May has been fantastic this year. But I think the idea that they took a player that Kevin O'Connell did not want
makes no
is
sense.
just not the case.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I think ultimately the reason they said we can walk away from the Drake May deal was they felt good enough about their other options that they didn't need to give up quite as much to go get him. So, that decision will be, judged by history here, but I think Kevin O'Connell was very much on board with getting J.J. McCarthy and believing he could win with him here.
We had a question asked much earlier in the program that I want to run by you, and it's kind of impossible to answer, but it's worth trying to answer, I think. And he said, if the Vikings had to this point in the season even serviceable quarterback play, would they not be at least in the playoff chase? And I think the answer to that is they probably would. I mean, again, how many games is it worth? You win 2 more, you're still only 6-6. But there have been a number of games this year where you go, well, you're getting nothing offensively, especially the last several weeks. What do you think about that? Is if you get not great quarterback play, but serviceable quarterback play, are you and I still talking about a playoff opportunity at this point in the season?
Yeah, I think we probably are. I mean, just looking back on it, they lost to the Steelers by 3. They lost to the Eagles by 6. Ravens was an 8-point game. The Bears, a 2-point game, one that they should have won because they had the lead there at the end, and that was even on a day where McCarthy did not play very well. So if you say 3 of those games go their way in the kind of one-score game department, then you're talking about a team that's 7-5 at this point, and they're right in the mix. Or even if 2 of those are in their favor, it's 6-6, and they still have a chance. So, yeah, I think that is true. And you look at, there was a lot of issues with the false starts in the Ravens game, and I think McCarthy's probably part of that with some of the cadence stuff, and then certainly the Bears game was, and the Eagles game would have still been Carson Wentz, and the Steelers game would have been Carson Wentz. But you're talking at that point about a guy that's still coming in and I think played relatively well, at least in the Steelers game from what I remember that morning in Dublin. But yes, I think if they had better quarterback play, particularly not turning the ball over, that has been the single biggest issue. Yes, I think they'd still be in the playoff mix.
Do we have, so we got at least 2 offensive linemen, I think officially listed as questionable. Can you update us on those injuries and any others?
Yeah. So Christian Darrisaw, Donovan Jackson, both questionable for Sunday. Darrisaw was back to full participation today. O'Connell sounded optimistic about both of those guys today. I think Darrisaw probably has a little better chance than Jackson, who was limited again today and was a DNP on Wednesday. So I wouldn't be surprised if they give Jackson another week. But I think Darrisaw, none of this is necessarily anything new at this point. It's just the knee on the injury report at this point. The ankle is off of there. Doesn't mean it's completely healed, but it's not causing him to land on the injury report at this point. So I would think the assumption is he plays, and they would be ready to have him for as much of the game as they can get him. Donovan Jackson, we'll see. If it's not him, it's Blake Brandel, who's out of the concussion protocol. So the 3 guys that are questionable for Sunday are Jackson, Darrisaw, and Ty Chandler, who's coming back from injured reserve, and then they will be without Theo Jackson and Levi Drake Rodriguez. Both those guys were ruled out because of neck injuries today, and then everybody else should be ready to go. No injury designations for Ryan Kelly, for Josh Metellus. J.B. McCarthy is obviously out of the concussion protocol. Jonathan Grenard should be ready to go. So it's really those offensive line starters that they have to make a decision on, and I think we'll see more of that Sunday morning, but I think Darrisaw probably has the better chance, at least as I sit here on Friday.
Is this a game in which the Vikings have to quietly, secretly worry about the crowd?
I think so. I mean, they've lost 4 in a row. They got shut out last week for the first time since 2007. They haven't scored a touchdown since November 16th. And the last time the crowd saw them at home, they blew it at the end against the division rival. So, yes, I think they will be at risk of getting booed and hearing about it pretty early if things don't start well.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah, I think that's completely the case. And I think Kevin O'Connell would say, hey, it's fair because I know it bothers him when they don't win at home because I think he feels it in terms of the impact that it has on the fans. They've lost 3 in a row at home, and they don't like to lose in that building because it has been a pretty good home field advantage for them. And, this is the second time in 3 years that they've struggled to win at home. And that has a lot to do with why they are where they are. It's all been one-score games lately at home. So, yeah, I think if they don't come out well, especially against a team that you should be able to move the ball on, I would imagine the fans will get a little bit restless. So how they get going on Sunday could have a lot to do with how they're received and what the pulse of that place is, so to speak.
The takeaway turnover differential, as you discussed earlier, is astonishing. It's minus 15. There are only 2 teams I see in double digits in the minus category, the Vikings and the New York Jets. And obviously the other end of the spectrum, and this is largely why the Bears are in such good position, they're plus 17. I mean, that's a swing of 32 between the Vikings on one end and the Bears on the other. That as much as we examine so many other aspects to this thing, you break it all down. Really, a lot of it, 80% of it, goes back to that single statistic. Correct?
Yeah, it does. I mean, just looking at it, they've turned the ball over more than any team in the NFL. They've thrown more interceptions than any team in the NFL. I mean, 19 interceptions in a season in this day and age is almost unheard of.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm trying to think of the last time a Vikings team got picked off this much in a year. I have to think it's been a very long time. Actually, looking back on it, they got picked off this many times in 23, which was the year that they went through all the different quarterbacks, but they were still getting a little bit more in terms of takeaways and certainly more productive with Kirk Cousins the first half of that season. So, yeah, it is a astonishing number, especially with still 5 games to go. It's going to go into the 20s, and now I'm curious to see the last time it's been this high, but I have to think it's been a very long time because quarterbacks just don't throw interceptions very much anymore.
No.
It's much more you're not throwing the ball over the middle or at least putting yourself at risk when you do it. Everything quarterbacks are just more precise, more accurate. I don't think that's something that you expect to see. I mean, those numbers sound like something you'd have seen in the 1970s, I think, or maybe the 80s when you could kind of hang all over receivers and do whatever you wanted to them. But to have it be that high in 2025 is a big deal. And then the takeaways, this defense last year was the best in the league, and it just hasn't been anywhere near that. So yes, I mean that stat is why they are where they are. I mean, the numbers of how well they play when they win the turnover battle under Kevin O'Connell are pretty clear, and it's why that's the biggest reason they are pretty much waving goodbye to the playoffs this year, in my mind. 19
interceptions is 5 more than the second worst total at 14. The Dolphins have thrown 14, and I think the Raiders have thrown 14 as well. I mean, that is remarkably astonishing. And in terms of our takeaway number, we're still only, I think, at 11 for the year, and we got 5 in the only home game we've won against the Bengals, correct?
Yeah, it is. They just haven't been able to get the same number of tipped passes to turn into picks. I think it's a lot of that. I mean, they were able to force some fumbles last year, but a lot of it last year was you got tips, you got overthrows, you had Cam Bynum back there making a lot of plays. I do think they've missed him in terms of coming down with interceptions, but Byron Murphy had 7 picks last year, and I don't think he has one yet this year. So it's in a number of spots, but that pass rush gets enough pressure that you should be able to turn some of those plays into turnovers, and they haven't been able to do that. It just, looking back, I was digging through old stats in the run-up when you were asking the question. The last time they threw more picks than this in a season was 2010, which was, of course, the last year with Brett Favre where they brought him back. He was 11 touchdowns, 19 picks that year, and then Joe Webb and T-Jack added another 7. So that's what we're talking about. It's been a very, very long time since they have had this number of interceptions from a quarterback position.
Thank you for the time, as always. Have a great Sunday, and we'll chat next week.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dan. Ben
Goessling, Star Tribune, brought to you by Standard Heating and Air Conditioning, with some fairly sobering numbers there to discuss. So if you have, even I can do this math, if your defense has 11 takeaways for the entire season and you got 5 of them in a single game, that means you've only had 6 in your other 11 games.
Correct.
That's not going to work.
No.
Very effectively, especially if on the other end of the spectrum, you're a turnover machine, which the Vikings have been. 19 interceptions with how many games left to go in the season? 5 games. I mean, that's hard to do.
That's not taking care of the ball.
No. And we all talk about Zim loved taking care of the ball, didn't he? He got mocked for it too. Well, are they mocking him now? What's Zim up to these days? Do we know?
He's probably on his ranch.
Probably true.
Just watching all the passing.
Top 5 at 5?
Wolves, Wild, Vikings, and what time is our apology to the Minnesota Twins?